The lake had frozen over by the time we arrived. Thick, white ice covered everything as far as I could see, smooth except for a few windblown snowdrifts scattered across it. Our cabin sat by itself on the shoreline, no other buildings nearby, just woods on one side and the wide open ice on the other. It was exactly what I wanted: quiet, no neighbors, no traffic, no cell signal. Just cold, still silence. I'd rented the place for 5 nights. Needed a break. The city had been getting to me. Too many people, too much noise, too many little things piling up until everything felt too loud. I didn't tell anyone I was going, just packed a duffel bag and drove north until the roads narrowed and the pine trees got taller. The cabin was small, just a single room with a bed, wood stove, a table, and a little kitchen setup. No TV, no Wi-Fi. I brought a stack of books and a few frozen meals, planning to do nothing but read, walk, maybe try ice fishing if I felt like it. The first day passed quietly. I chopped some wood, read by the fire, took a walk along the edge of the lake. There was no wind, just the dry crunch of my boots on the snow. I didn't see a single other person the whole day, not even an animal. It was peaceful. That night after dinner, I sat by the window looking out at the lake. The sky was cloudy, but the snow reflected a dull light, enough that I could make out the flat stretch of ice. Nothing moved. Eventually, I turned in early. The second night was when I saw the light. I had just put my book down, lying in bed, staring out the same window. I couldn't sleep, though it was late. I wasn't thinking about anything important, just watching the shadows and letting the silence settle over me. And then suddenly a quick flicker, just once, like someone out on the ice had clicked on a flashlight and turned it off just as fast. A small white burst against the dark, too quick to see clearly, but unmistakable. I sat up fast, heart picking up a little, pressed my face to the cold glass. Nothing. I waited there for a while, not moving, eyes wide. Nothing else happened. No second flash. No figures. Nothing. Eventually, I crawled back under the blankets, telling myself it could have been anything. Ice shifting. A reflection. I was out in the woods, far from everything, and sometimes the mind plays tricks when everything's still. Next morning, I checked the map. I'd brought a physical one because there was no signal out here. Spread it out on the table and scanned the whole area around the lake. No other cabins marked. No homes. Nothing but forest and hills. The closest road was the one I'd driven in on, and that was miles away. There was nothing on the other side of the lake. Not unless someone had built something off the books. That day, I walked the edge of the lake again. The ice was solid, thick under my boots. I didn't walk out too far, just enough to see that there were no cracks or weak spots. I looked for any signs of people. No fresh tracks, no tire marks, no snowmobiles. The only footprints I saw were mine from the day before. That night, I stayed up late on purpose. Kept the fire low, so the inside of the cabin stayed dark. Pulled a chair up to the window and just watched the lake. An hour passed, then 2. I was starting to think maybe I'd imagined the light before. My eyes were dry from staring so long when it happened again. One quick flash, just like the night before. Same spot. A burst of white, then nothing. Too far to see clearly, maybe 200 feet out onto the ice. Just a single blink. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I dozed off in the chair, I jerked awake, sure I'd seen something move. But the light didn't come back again. Just that one flash. The next day, I made a choice. I had to see for myself. In daylight, I bundled up long johns, wool socks, thick coat, gloves, scarf. The temperature was brutal, but the air was calm. Sky was overcast again, light gray without shadows. I crossed the ice slowly, step by step. It felt solid, like walking on concrete. Cold wind stung my face as I moved further from shore. I kept my eyes on the spot where I thought the light had been, somewhere near the center of the lake, maybe a bit to the left. After 20 minutes or so, I found them, boot prints. They came from the tree line across the lake, deep and sharp in the snow. Not fresh, but not old either. Edges still clean, not softened by wind. They came out from the trees in a straight line, headed right to where I was standing. And then they stopped, right there. No turn, No return path, no shuffle, no drag. Just stopped. Like whoever made them had walked out onto the ice, stood there for a while, and then vanished. I turned in a circle looking around. No shelter. No hole in the ice. Nothing. I followed the prints back toward the woods. About 50 steps. Then they disappeared into the trees. I didn't go in. I just stood there, staring at the dark undergrowth. It was too quiet. Not peaceful anymore. Just empty. I backed away, turned around, and walked back toward my side of the lake, trying not to keep looking over my shoulder. Back at the cabin, I locked the door. Sat in the chair again, staring at the lake. This time I closed the curtains after an hour. I didn't want to see the light again. Didn't want to wonder what was standing out there. That night, I barely slept. Every noise the cabin made, every crack of the wood, every hiss of wind outside. I jumped. I started to notice how thin the walls felt, how far I was from anyone else, how easy it would be for someone to come close without being seen or heard. On the fourth day, I checked the trees behind the cabin, walked a small loop into the forest looking for more tracks. Found nothing at first. Then behind a fallen log maybe 30 yards in, I saw something small, black and round. A flashlight. It was old, scratched up, worn, but it worked when I clicked it on. Same narrow beam as what I'd seen on the lake. I didn't pick it up, just stared at it for a long time, then left it there and walked back fast. I didn't wait for the fifth night. That afternoon, I packed everything, tossed it in the back of the truck, and left early. I didn't care that I'd paid for another day. I just wanted to be somewhere with people. Streetlights. Noise. A few days after I got home, I looked up news from that area. Nothing. No missing people. No reports. I even checked some local forums, but nobody talked about lights or boot prints or cabins out on the lake. It's been a few months now. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I saw that flash again. That single flicker across the ice. Like someone standing there, watching, waiting, never moving, never coming closer, just standing there. And the part that sticks with me the most, the part one think about when I'm lying awake late at night, is how those boot prints didn't go back. They just stopped, right at the edge of the lake. And whatever made them never came back out. We got to the cabin just before dark. It was tucked back into the woods, about 30 minutes off a gravel road that barely looked like it had been driven on in years. The trees were tall and tight together, the kind that blocked out most of the sky even during the day. A friend of mine had rented the place online, some off-the-grid getaway upstate. Cheap, no Wi-Fi, no service, no neighbors for miles. It sounded like a good idea when we booked it. Quiet, simple. Just a long weekend away from everything. There were 4 of us, me, Adam, Mike, and Theo. We parked a little ways down the trail, carried our stuff up to the cabin. The place looked fine enough from the outside. Just one story, with old but sturdy-looking wood siding, a steep roof, and a small porch with 2 rotting chairs no one wanted to sit in. The inside was dusty, but not dirty. Living room with a fireplace and a sagging couch, a little kitchenette with shelves full of canned food, a couple bedrooms, and one small bathroom with a well water pump that coughed and rattled every time we flushed or turned the tap. Lights worked off a generator that we had to top off with gas every now and then. We noticed the door on the first night. It was near the back of the hallway, opposite the bathroom. Thick wooden door, metal knob. There was a padlock on it, not heavy duty, just the kind you'd use to lock a shed or something. The key wasn't on any of the rings we'd been given, and there was a note taped next to it. Just said, "Supply closet, please don't tamper." We didn't think much of it. Most rental places had spots they didn't want guests messing with, storage, cleaning supplies, maybe a fuse box. We joked about it for a second, then moved on. First night went fine. We stayed up late drinking beers, playing cards by lantern light when the generator cut off around midnight. We didn't hear anything weird, didn't see anything off. The woods were quiet outside. No wind, no animals. Just still and cold and dark. It was the second night when things started to feel strange. We'd spent the day hiking around the woods nearby. It was colder than we expected, and by the time we got back to the cabin, The sun was already dipping low. We got a fire going in the old stove, made some canned soup and pasta, and sat around talking until the generator sputtered again. The fire stayed lit, casting just enough light across the room for us to move around. I went to bed around 1 a.m. The others stayed up for a while longer. I remember lying there, half asleep, just listening to the wind tapping against the windows. Then I heard it. At first, I thought maybe it was the fire settling, but it was too steady. A soft scratching sound, very light, coming from down the hall, from behind that locked door. I sat up and listened harder. It was slow and small, like something dragging gently against wood. I figured maybe a mouse had gotten stuck in there, or a squirrel. The place was old. Animals got into walls sometimes. Still, it creeped me out. The scratching didn't last long, maybe a minute or two, then stopped completely. I told myself it wasn't worth getting up over. I lay back down and fell asleep. Next morning, I brought it up while we were eating breakfast. None of them had heard anything. They laughed it off, said maybe it was rats, maybe the wind. I let it go. That night, it happened again. I woke up around 3 a.m. Something was moving again behind the locked door. This time, louder. I sat up and listened. It wasn't just scratching now. There was a faint thumping noise, a small shift, something hitting wood, like a box being pushed, or someone stepping lightly on the other side. I got out of bed quietly and walked into the hallway. The floor creaked under my feet. I stood in front of the door for a long time just listening. It was definitely coming from in there. I leaned down and looked at the bottom gap. Couldn't see anything. I tried the knob. Still locked. Solid. The noise stopped as soon as I touched the handle. I stood there for another few seconds. Heart beating harder now. It was stupid, I knew that. Probably an animal, or something settling, but it didn't feel right. I stared at the door a little longer, then went back to bed. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, I was the first one up. The fire was dead, and the cold had settled in through the walls. I made coffee with bottled water and went to the front porch to clear my head. When I came back inside, the others were stirring. Mike walked down the hallway toward the bathroom and stopped. He called out to us. We came over. There was something on the floor in front of the locked door. A note. Just a torn piece of paper. Folded once. We picked it up and opened it. No handwriting. Just typed words. Bold. Centered. Don't stay a third night. That was it. No name. No explanation. No signature. We stared at each other. Quiet. No one made a joke. No one laughed. We were all just standing there, holding our breath. The door was still locked. We checked it again. The padlock hadn't been touched. No signs of damage. No scratches. No marks. Nothing. We searched the rest of the cabin. Every room. Every window. Nothing was broken. Nothing was open. No footprints outside. No fresh marks in the dirt around the porch. No tire tracks. No sign that anyone had been near the place. Still, someone had slipped that note under the door. We didn't say much the rest of the morning. We packed slowly. We didn't even eat. Just loaded up the car and locked the place behind us. On the way back down the trail, we kept looking behind us. Every sound in the trees made us turn our heads. When we finally hit the gravel road, we all let out a breath at the same time, like we'd all been holding it for hours. None of us ever went back. We didn't report anything. Didn't contact the owners. We just let it go. For a while, I convinced myself it was a prank. Maybe the owner's way of scaring off guests from snooping. Maybe someone local who liked messing with tourists. I thought of a dozen ways it could have been harmless. But the more time passed, the more one thing stuck in my head. Whoever slipped that note under the door was already inside that locked room. And they never left. We rented a small cabin up north for a weekend in January. It was one of those last-minute winter trips you plan when everyone's burnt out and needs to get away. We found the place through a listing online. No reviews, just a few blurry pictures of snow-covered trees, a wooden porch, and a frozen lake in the background. The listing said it was small but had heat, electricity, and running water, so we booked it. There were 4 of us, me, my brother, and 2 of our friends. We drove up Friday afternoon, made good time despite the snow, and reached just before dark. The cabin sat a few hundred feet off a narrow road, tucked back among tall pine trees. It looked older in person. Weather-worn wood, a sagging porch, and a small chimney puffing weak smoke. Inside, it was warmer than expected. A gas heater buzzed in the corner of the living room, and there was a narrow hallway that led to 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom. The kitchen was just a nook off the main room, fridge, sink, and a window above the counter that looked out toward the woods. That first night, after we unpacked and settled in, we cooked pasta, played cards, and drank a little. Nothing crazy, just quiet. Around midnight, everyone else went to bed. I stayed up scrolling through my phone for a while. The room was dark except for the dull yellow light above the sink. I got thirsty, so I got up to grab some water. When I walked into the kitchen, I noticed the window blinds above the sink were open. That struck me as strange, because I could have sworn they'd been closed earlier. It was pitch black outside, nothing but that wide, empty stretch of trees. The reflection of the inside light made it hard to see out, but something about the open blinds made me uncomfortable. I closed them slowly and stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. Just the low hum of the heater. I went back to bed. A few hours later, maybe 3 in the morning, I got up to pee. When I walked past the kitchen, I noticed the blinds again. Open. Same as before. I stood there longer this time, trying to think if maybe one of the guys had gotten up and opened them. But why? It was the middle of the night. I closed them again, this time carefully making sure the cord was pulled tight. I even checked to see if the window was locked. It was. In the morning, I got up last. Everyone was already drinking coffee, bundled up, talking about going for a hike down the trail past the lake. I went to the kitchen to make some eggs. The blinds were open again. This time I stopped and looked hard at them. The cord was dangling just like it was when I'd pulled them shut, but the slats were fully raised. Sunlight was pouring in, hitting the counter. I asked if anyone had opened them. No one had. They barely looked at the window. Said maybe it was me and I forgot. But I knew I hadn't. I let it go. We spent most of the day outside, walking around the lake, taking pictures, freezing our asses off. It snowed a little, just enough to leave a thin layer on the ground. The kind that makes everything quiet. We came back in the evening, cooked again, and played more cards. There was no TV. No cell signal either. That was part of the reason we'd come, to disconnect for a while. But I couldn't stop thinking about the blinds. I checked them again that night. Still open. I pulled them down, locked the window again, then went around the cabin and made sure every window and door was locked tight. It made me feel a little better. We went to bed around 11. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up. I remember the time exactly because I looked at my watch when I opened my eyes. Something had woken me. I didn't know what it was right away. It wasn't loud, just off. I lay still for a second, letting my ears adjust. The heater hummed faintly. One of the beds creaked in the next room. Then I heard it again, soft tapping. Faint, like something lightly bumping against glass. I got out of bed slowly and walked down the hall. The tapping stopped. The heater kicked off, leaving the cabin completely quiet. I stepped into the kitchen. The blinds were up, not just partially, all the way, pulled up like someone had yanked the cord to look out. The cold from the window leaked into the room. I stood there staring at it for maybe 10 seconds before I walked closer. Outside was nothing but snow and trees. But then I noticed the ground below the window. The snow was disturbed. There were prints in it. Deep, clear prints, like someone had stood right up against the wall. I leaned in, my face almost to the glass. The porch light was off, but there was enough moonlight to see them. Footprints, leading up to the window and then turning back toward the woods. I stared at them, trying to count how many. Maybe 8? 10? It was hard to tell with the moonlight and how the snow blended everything together. But they were definitely human. Not boots either. Just plain shoes. I could see the toe lines. Someone had walked up from the woods, stood right under the window, and then left. I didn't check the rest of the cabin. I didn't go back to bed. I walked down the hall, grabbed my backpack, and threw on my coat. Then I quietly woke up the others. I didn't explain. I just said we needed to leave. Something about the way I said it must have convinced them, because they didn't argue. We packed up in under 10 minutes. I didn't even brush my teeth. Just shoved everything into bags and loaded the car. My hands shook the whole time. As we backed out of the driveway, I looked back once. Just a glimpse at the kitchen window. The blinds were still up. The snow around the cabin was untouched except for our own boot prints and the tracks leading back into the trees. We didn't talk much on the drive. No one asked why we left. I think they felt it, too. That pressure in the cabin. That tight, quiet feeling like you're being watched. I didn't bring it up until we were hours away. I told them about the blinds, the footprints. No one had an explanation. Maybe someone was watching us, they said. Maybe a drifter. A hunter. Someone just passing through. Maybe. But none of that explains how they got so close. How they kept coming back, quietly, without a sound. And none of it explains why the only window they ever touched was the one above the sink, right where I always stood alone in the dark. We never called the police. We never reported it. I didn't want to explain to some local sheriff that someone had been outside the cabin, opening blinds and standing in the snow. We never went back. I don't think the others will either. I still think about those prints sometimes, how they led straight from the forest to the cabin and back again, as if it was normal, as if that person had done it before. And maybe they had. Maybe we weren't the first ones to stay there, but we made sure we were the last. It was the first night at the cabin. We'd arrived late afternoon, me and 2 friends, after a long drive through the mountains. The place was deep in the woods, farther out than I expected. No neighbors, no cell signal, no sound but wind through the trees and birds calling out once in a while. It felt peaceful at first. We unloaded our stuff, got the firewood inside, checked out the rooms. The cabin was old but not run down. Wood creaked a little when we walked, but everything else was solid. No Wi-Fi, no TV. That was the whole point. Just a weekend away from people, phones, everything. After dinner, we sat around the fireplace for a while. Played cards, ate some chips, had a few drinks. Around 10, we killed the lights and got ready for bed. There were 2 bedrooms and a pull-out couch in the main room. I took the couch. I remember lying there under the thick wool blanket, staring at the ceiling beams and listening to the soft crackle of what was left in the fireplace. No moon that night. When we turned the lights off, it got really dark, like full black. You couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. I started drifting off, just beginning to slide into sleep, when I heard 3 knocks, loud and slow. They came from the back door. Not a window, not the wall. The back door. Just 3 knocks, then nothing. I froze. I didn't sit up right away. I just lay there staring into the dark, trying to be sure I'd really heard what I thought I heard. A second later, I heard one of my friends shifting in the next room, so I knew I wasn't the only one who'd heard it. No one moved. No one called out. We just waited. It was dead quiet outside. No footsteps. No rustling. Just the fire popping now and then. I sat up slowly and squinted at the back door. From where I was lying, I couldn't see it, but I kept listening. About a minute passed. Maybe less. Then 3 more knocks. This time, they came from the front door. Same pattern. Same slow, heavy rhythm. I turned and looked toward the front window. There was no porch light, and it was too dark to see anything. I stood up and walked slowly over to the window, not turning any lights on, just moving quietly. I cupped my hands around my face and pressed them to the glass to block the reflection. I stared out into the woods. Nothing. No movement, no flashlights, no shapes. I held still and just listened. I couldn't hear breathing, couldn't hear footsteps. I stayed at the window for a while. My heart was beating heavy in my chest. Not panicked, just alert, focused. I looked toward the driveway, but there were no headlights, no taillights, no silhouette of a car. If someone was out there, they hadn't driven. Or they'd parked way out by the road and walked in. Still, no one moved. No more knocking came. We didn't speak. I didn't even see my friends, just heard one of them shut their bedroom door quietly a little later. I guess we all agreed silently not to answer, not to open the door. I stayed up for another hour, maybe two, just lying there with my ears tuned to every sound. A raccoon moved through the leaves once. I heard a branch snap out by the trees, but nothing came close again. Eventually, I drifted off. In the morning, we got up early. None of us said anything at first. We just moved around the kitchen slowly, making coffee and toast, each of us avoiding eye contact. After a while, we stepped outside. That's when we saw the footprints. They were all over the dirt around the cabin, not just a few. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. The ground was soft from a rain the day before, so the prints had sunk in deep. Most of them looked the same size, same tread pattern. A flat rubber sole with a worn heel. They circled the cabin over and over, not just passing by. Whoever it was, they'd walked around the cabin again and again. They'd stepped up close to the windows. The shoe prints were right under the glass in the front, right under my window by the couch, right by the back door. Then they'd loop around the sides and come back, around and around. In one place, the footprints had overlapped so many times that the dirt was churned up. It looked like whoever it was had stood there for a while, just standing, not moving, not pacing, just standing still. There were no other prints. No dog tracks, no second person, no tire marks. Just that one pattern. One person, probably a man based on the shoe size, walking in circles around the cabin in the dark. We followed the prints out toward the tree line, but they disappeared a few yards in. The ground got rocky and dry. No tracks after that. Nothing to follow. We didn't say anything dramatic. No one freaked out. But the tension between us was thick. We packed most of our stuff before noon. We didn't even talk about staying the extra nights we'd planned. We left that afternoon. The drive down the mountain was quiet. I watched the trees for a while through the window, half expecting to see someone watching from behind them. I never did. We didn't report it. What would we say? No damage, no forced entry, no crime. Just knocking and footprints. That's all it was. But that was enough. Weeks later, I thought back on it and realized something. The knocks had come from both doors, back, then front, less than a minute apart. To do that, someone would have had to move around the cabin in the pitch dark, in silence, without a flashlight, without tripping or making a sound, and then stop right in front of the other door to knock again. Then vanish. Or maybe there were two of them, one at each door. That thought still sits in the back of my mind. We never went back. We don't talk about it anymore. But I still think about the man walking circles around the cabin, over and over, in the dark, watching us sleep. I needed a break from everything, people, traffic, the constant noise of the city. My friend Ryan had this old cabin in the mountains that he rarely used anymore. Said it was his uncle's place, but the man had passed years ago, and no one really went up there. Ryan told me it was peaceful, simple, and that if I needed real quiet, that was the place to be. I didn't ask too many questions. I just packed a few essentials, grabbed some food, and made the drive up there on a Thursday. The road to the cabin twisted through thick forest. The farther I drove, the more the air felt different. Lighter, colder, and clean in a way I hadn't felt in years. The last few miles were just gravel and dirt, and I had to slow down to avoid tearing up the underside of my car. When I finally pulled up, the place looked exactly like what you'd picture. Wooden exterior, a small porch out front, a metal chimney pipe sticking up from the side, and tall pines on every edge of the clearing. No cell signal. No neighbors. Not even a power line in sight. Inside was just as simple. One bedroom, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove, an old couch that sagged in the middle, and a hallway that led to the bathroom and storage room. The only thing that stood out was the attic hatch, one of those pull-down ones with a little rope hanging from it. It was in the middle of the hallway ceiling. I remember looking up at it while unpacking, thinking how odd it was that something so basic could feel a little out of place. But I didn't dwell on it. The first night was calm. I read for a while by flashlight, made some instant noodles, and listened to the wind push through the trees outside. The sound of the wind mixing with creaks from the cabin settling was kind of nice. Old buildings have their own way of talking, I guess. I fell asleep without any trouble. The second day, I spent some time hiking around the area. There was an old logging trail that led off into the woods behind the cabin. It was overgrown, but I followed it for a bit, taking pictures of moss-covered trees and twisted roots. I saw deer prints and what might have been a black bear's track, though it looked old. Nothing felt off. I was tired by the time I got back. Made some canned chili, washed up using melted snow, and turned in early. It was somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning when I woke up. There was this soft creaking sound, light but steady, like old wood shifting under weight. It wasn't the random pop and groan of the cabin settling. This was rhythmic, almost like footsteps, but very slow. I sat up in bed, not moving for a minute, just listening. After a while, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the hallway. That's when I noticed it. The attic hatch was open. Not all the way, but enough that the ladder was halfway down. I stared at it for a while, not really knowing what I was supposed to feel. My first thought was that maybe I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe it had been like that, and I just hadn't seen. But I knew that wasn't true. I would have remembered that. I walked slowly under it, careful not to touch the ladder. The darkness up there was complete. I couldn't see past the edge of the opening. I pointed my flashlight up and shined it around. Just beams, dust, and insulation. No movement. No sound. I stood there for what felt like a long time. My chest was tight, and I had this cold feeling in my legs, like my body was waiting for something. But nothing happened. Eventually, I reached up and pushed the ladder back up until the hatch clicked shut. Then I locked the little latch on it. I even stood there and stared at it for a bit longer, making sure it stayed closed. I didn't hear anything else that night. The next morning, I didn't sleep in. I got up just after sunrise, still feeling off. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination. I even started thinking maybe the wind had blown it down, but that didn't make much sense. Those things usually don't just fall open, and there hadn't been a strong wind. When I went back out to the hallway in daylight, I saw something new. Just under the attic hatch, on the wall, were small scratch marks. 4 or 5 of them, short but deep enough to scrape off the outer layer of the wood paneling. They weren't there the day before. I was sure of it. They looked like they'd been made by a hand or tool, not random damage, not something that had always been there. They weren't animal marks either. They were too deliberate, too clean. I stood there staring at them for a long time. The marks weren't high up, like from something falling out. They were lower down, like something had slid down the ladder and let their fingers drag along the wall. I ran my hand over them. The wood felt fresh, like the splinters had just come up. That was enough for me. I packed everything as fast as I could. Didn't bother with breakfast. Didn't double check the cabin. I just loaded the car and got out. The whole time, I kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting someone to step out. I didn't relax until I was halfway down the mountain, back where the road was paved again. I didn't tell Ryan the full story. Just said I wasn't used to being that far out alone. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I know I locked that attic. I know I didn't touch it, and I know those scratch marks were new. Something had come down from that attic. I still think about it sometimes, especially at night. That slow creaking sound, that open hatch. Whatever was up there wasn't trying to scare me. It was quiet, patient, like it had been waiting. That's the part that sticks with me. How quiet it all was. I haven't been back since, and I won't. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. I needed a break from work, from the city, from people. I found the cabin listed on a forum post. Small, deep in the woods, cheap. The guy who owned it didn't even ask many questions. Just told me how to get there, said the key would be under the old flower pot on the porch, and that there was no cell service. I drove up Friday afternoon. The road got worse as I went deeper into the woods. Gravel turned to dirt, then barely a trail. Trees leaned over the road on both sides, and the light started to fade even though it wasn't late. I passed no other cars, no cabins, no people. By the time I reached the place, it felt like I was 50 miles from anywhere. The cabin was small, made of dark wood, one floor. It looked older than I expected. The paint on the window frames was peeling, the porch creaked under my boots, and the flower pot holding the key was cracked down the middle and full of dead leaves. I opened the door and stepped inside. It smelled like old wood and dust. The air was still and dry. There was a small couch, a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and a kitchenette with an ancient stove and a little sink. One bedroom in the back, with a bed that looked like it hadn't been used in years. There were no personal things, no pictures, no books, not even any kitchenware. Just the bare bones of a place meant to be used once in a while and forgotten in between. I set my bag down and opened a few windows to let in fresh air. It was quiet, so quiet it made my ears ring. Not the kind of quiet you get in the city during the night, but the deep, full kind that only exists far from people. I heard nothing. No wind, no animals, not even birds. I figured it was just the hour. I told myself I'd feel better in the morning. That night, I started a fire in the fireplace, heated up a can of chili on my camping stove, and ate while sitting on the couch. I read a paperback I'd brought until the fire died down. Then I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. There was no sound. No creaks, no bugs buzzing, no owls, no wind. Just nothing. I couldn't sleep for a long time. My body felt stiff, tense. I wasn't scared exactly, but I wasn't relaxed either. The silence felt too heavy. I don't know when I finally drifted off. In the morning, the air felt colder. I had to wear my jacket even inside. I made instant coffee and drank it outside on the porch. I still didn't hear any animals. No birdsong. No squirrels. I thought that was weird, but again, told myself maybe it was just the season or the elevation. Still, I couldn't shake a feeling like something was off. Later that morning, I decided to walk. I took a trail that led downhill behind the cabin, through dense pine trees. The trail was old and barely visible, but someone had used it before. There were faint signs of boots in the dirt, too old to be recent. I followed it for maybe 30 minutes until I found an old clearing. There were broken logs, black patches of dead grass, and an odd circle of rocks half sunken into the ground, like maybe someone had once built a fire there and abandoned it. I didn't stay long. Something about the clearing felt wrong. It felt dead. When I got back to the cabin, I noticed something strange. The door was open, just a crack. I was sure I'd closed it, even latched it. I stood there for a minute, just looking at it. The wind hadn't picked up. There had been no wind all day. Nothing could have pushed it open. I told myself maybe I hadn't latched it tight. Maybe the old hinges were loose. I stepped inside. Everything looked the same. Nothing missing, nothing moved. But I still felt it. A change in the air. The kind of feeling you get when you walk into a room someone just left, even though there's no trace of them. The air felt disturbed. That night, I lit another fire. The wood popped and cracked, but didn't give off much warmth. I sat close and kept checking behind me. I didn't know why. It just felt like something was wrong with the back of the room. Like the shadows near the bedroom door were too dark, too still. I tried to ignore it, but I found myself glancing that way every few seconds, without meaning to. At some point, I realized the air didn't smell like wood smoke anymore. It smelled metallic, almost like blood. Faint, but strong enough to notice. I checked the fireplace. Nothing odd. I sniffed around the room. Couldn't find the source. I looked under the sink, checked my food. Even the bathroom pipes. Nothing. I opened the front door to get fresh air and stood on the porch. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint, but there. In the dirt just beyond the steps. Bare feet. Adult-sized. They came from the side of the cabin, stopped near the porch, then turned and went back the way they came. No shoes. No other markings. The ground wasn't muddy. Who would walk barefoot in the woods in dry, cold dirt? And why just come to the porch and leave? I went back inside, locked the door, and dragged the table in front of it. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, the air inside felt worse. Heavier. Like the walls were pressing in. I opened every window, even though the air outside was freezing. I needed to breathe. I needed to feel like the place was still part of the real world. I walked around the cabin to look for tracks. The bare footprints were gone. No sign of them. Not washed away, just gone. I walked farther out into the woods, thinking maybe someone was living nearby. But I found nothing. No tents, no cabins, no shelters, no people. Just forest, dense and still. When I came back, I saw the bedroom door was shut. I never shut that door. I never even went in there since the first night. It had stayed open the whole time. I stopped in the main room and just stared at the closed door. It took me a long time to open it. I felt stupid, scared like a kid, but my hands were shaking. I finally pushed it open. The room was just as I'd left it, except for the window. It was open, wide open. The curtains were fluttering in the cold wind. I closed the window, locked it. Then I started packing. I didn't care about the weekend anymore. I wanted to leave. The place felt wrong. Not haunted, just watched. Like the trees outside were hiding someone. Or something. When I stepped outside with my bag, I found a pile of rocks on the porch. Neatly stacked. 5 stones, flat, balanced. They hadn't been there when I went inside. I dropped my bag and looked around. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just trees. But I swear, I felt something out there. I didn't know where or what, but I felt it. I kicked the rock pile off the porch and left it scattered in the dirt. I didn't look back. The drive out felt longer than the drive in. I kept checking my mirrors. Nothing followed, but I didn't feel safe until I hit pavement again, hours later. I never figured out who put the rocks there, or whose footprints I saw, or why the window was open. There were no signs of animals. No signs of people, just that dead silence, those small things out of place, and a feeling that's hard to explain. A pressure, like something wanted me gone, but never showed itself. I never went back. I don't even remember exactly where it was. I couldn't find the place again if I tried. And honestly, I don't want to. Whatever was out there didn't need to be seen to be real. It just needed to be close. That was enough. We got to the cabin around 3 in the afternoon. It was quiet, like the kind of quiet you don't really notice until you stop talking. The road leading up to it was mostly dirt, with patches of gravel here and there, and the trees got denser the closer we got. The place was small, 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a narrow porch with a view of the trees and not much else. No nearby cabins. No neighbors. Just us. It was supposed to be a break from everything. Work, noise, people. My girlfriend had found the cabin online a month before and booked it for the weekend. The listing said it had been empty for a while, clean, well kept, and far enough out in the woods that you wouldn't hear anything but birds and the wind. That part turned out to be true. We brought everything with us: food, clothes, soap, towels, even our own bedding. We'd done a few trips like this before, so we knew what to expect. The cabin itself looked just like the photos. A bit older than we imagined, with creaky floorboards and a faint musty smell, but nothing unusual. The kitchen had a working fridge and stove. The living area had an old couch and a wood stove. We settled in quickly. First night was fine. We cooked pasta, drank some wine, and played cards until late. The bedroom was small, barely enough space to walk around the bed. But it was cozy, peaceful. It was the second day that things felt off. I don't know what made me notice it, but something just didn't feel right when I woke up. Like I was being watched, or maybe like something had shifted slightly, and I couldn't explain how. We brushed it off. Spent most of the day hiking a nearby trail. Didn't see a single person. We were tired when we got back. Made soup, read for a bit. Normal stuff. Later that night, I got up to use the bathroom. It was small sink, toilet, shower, nothing fancy. The toothbrush holder was one of those glass cups that sits next to the faucet. When we arrived, it was empty. We'd both just kept our toothbrushes in our bags. But now there were 3. Ours green and white, and red and black. And a third one. Blue. Worn bristles, a little dry toothpaste crusted around the base. Used. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. I even ran the tap for a second, like that would explain it somehow. I didn't say anything at first. I went back to the room, lay down, and stared at the ceiling. After about 10 minutes, I couldn't hold it in. I got back up and checked again. Still there. Same toothbrush. My girlfriend was already half asleep when I finally told her. She sat up, confused, and followed me to the bathroom. We stared at it together. Neither of us said anything for a while. I think we were both just trying to come up with a good reason for it to be there. We checked everything after that. Every window, every door. None of them were broken. None unlocked. The cabin had one front door and a sliding glass back door that led to the woods. The windows were old but solid. No signs of anyone getting in. Nothing missing. Nothing else new. We even opened all the cabinets, every drawer. Nothing out of place. There wasn't even any food left by the owner. We'd brought our own pans, utensils, everything. That blue toothbrush was the only thing in the whole cabin that we didn't recognize. I called the rental owner. He answered, said he hadn't been up there in over a month. Said no one else had keys. Told me he'd double-checked everything before the last guests left 5 weeks ago. He sounded genuinely surprised. Asked if he ever left anything behind in the bathroom. Maybe an old cleaning lady forgot something. He swore no. We didn't sleep that night. Just lay there in bed, lights on. Both of us wide awake. We didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no animals outside. Nothing strange at all. That made it worse somehow. I kept staring at the hallway outside the bedroom, waiting to see something move. I kept thinking about how quiet it was. If someone had been hiding out here, they'd hear every creak, every whisper, and we'd hear them too, but we didn't. At some point, we started talking in whispers, throwing out ideas. Maybe someone had a key copy, maybe a neighbor or a hunter, or someone who'd stayed here before. But there were no other cabins in sight. No tire tracks near the driveway except ours. No footprints in the dirt outside the back door. We even walked around the cabin with our phones' flashlights. Nothing. No one. I started to think maybe the toothbrush had been there all along, and we missed it. Maybe it was in the drawer and got knocked into the holder somehow. But we'd been brushing our teeth in that same sink for 2 days. We would have seen it. We left at sunrise. Didn't bother making coffee. Just packed everything into the car and drove. Didn't even do a final check. I left the key on the hook by the door, just like the owner asked. As we were pulling out of the driveway, I looked back at the cabin and felt this cold weight in my chest. Not fear exactly, just something deeper, harder to explain. A kind of pressure, like being watched, but not from the trees. From inside the cabin. The drive back to town was quiet. We barely talked. Every once in a while I'd glance at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone walking down the road behind us. But it was just trees. We never figured out where the toothbrush came from. We both kept thinking about it, but we stopped talking about it after a week or so. Nothing else ever happened. No break-ins, no weird phone calls, no strange emails from the rental guy. Life just kept going. But I still think about it sometimes. About how something as small as a toothbrush can ruin your sense of safety. It didn't have to be a knife or a message written on the mirror or a busted window. Just something quiet. Something that didn't belong. The scariest part wasn't the idea of someone breaking in. It was the idea that maybe they never left. Maybe they were there the whole time, just staying out of sight, waiting, watching. And maybe they left that toothbrush there on purpose, just to let us know.